unequivocally the Super Bowl for New York Jet fans.
Field Yates, baby. Field Gosh darn Yates. Let's bring him on the show. Come on, people. Connor Rogers is joining the show. What's up, Connor? But Trevor Gosh darn Sycamore, baby, for me, personally, my favorite New York Jet of all time.
Wow, it's great to be on. What an intro that was right there.
Paul, nobody does an intro like you, man.
Paul, you give the best intro of literally any podcast that I've ever been.
I'm gonna lose my gosh darn bananas.
Hey everybody, Paul Esden Jr., a.k.a. Boy Green. I'm the New York Jets digital reporter for Heavy.com. It's time to get into the nitty-gritty on the NFL schedule, and there's no one better to do it with than the NFL's director of broadcasting. Let's bring Charlotte Carey, who's in the room. She's dissecting things, and there's some diagrams perhaps, and some computers, and some beeping, some booping, some bopping, trying to figure out what the heck is going on with the schedule. So let's bring her in to find out all the juicy deets. Charlotte Carey joining us here on the show. What's up, Charlotte?
Hey, Paul, thanks for having me.
Of course. So let's get into this. I've got a lot of questions, and I'm sure you have answers. So first off, I'm kind of curious. So week one, the Jets they're on the road at the San Francisco 49ers. Was that sort of an IOU to ESPN, one of your broadcast partners? Because they said, oh, boy, this is great. We're getting Aaron Rodgers in 2023. And 4 snaps in, it goes to crap. The game still was pretty entertaining, but still, that was something, and we'll kind of get into this in a minute about the process of their wish list and submitting those to you guys. But is that almost like an IOU? Like, we got you. You want this, we'll give you, we'll redo, essentially run it back with a different opponent, but give another Monday Night Football game in terms of the Aaron Rodgers comeback versus the debut last year?
Yeah, Paul, it's a really good question. The answer is really no. We didn't have that kind of conversation, that IOU. We liked the idea of it, and we got pretty comfortable with it quickly. We saw different, iterations of it, whether it was, again, really running it back with Buffalo or changing it up. We like Jet San Fran. That was a game that it's a late game. It could end up in a lot of different spots, but you don't really want to see it end up at like a 4:05 window or something like that, where it can't go that wide. So putting it in a prime window made a lot of sense for us. And opening the season, Aaron Rodgers kind of going back home too. It made it a little fun. There's a story there too. And running it back from last year where, to your exact point, 4 snaps in, the biggest offseason story of last year just ended. So we're really excited to have this game in week one, kind of bookend week one. We have our big, exciting kickoff game, a lot of great content over the course of the week, and this is a really great way to end it.
Well, Charlotte, what is the process of that? Because you guys have a lot of wonderful broadcast partners that I'm sure, you have to try to, in your own way, I guess, appease everybody. But is there some submission of a wish list, like, hey, slide across the, these are the ones we'd like, and then everyone does that, and you try to factor that in a little bit? How does that go? Because I'm sure there are certain games or teams or things of that nature that some of these broadcast partners want. How do you factor that in? How does that process work?
The bottom line is everyone wants the same games. To be completely honest, no, but it's a process for sure. We definitely meet with the networks and talk through kind of what they're hoping to see over the course of the year, and it's all just suggestions, right? At the end of the day, the NFL makes the decisions on where all of these games are going. But it is interesting to hear from each of the networks, what if there are differences in what they're hoping for, or are looking to see, or if there's particular weeks that they're hoping to maximize, things along those lines. But again, it's all just kind of, they can communicate their preferences, but then the NFL will just take it under advisement and we'll make the best possible schedule. I'll tell you that one of the main things for us is trying to make sure that we're putting the right games for our fans in the right windows, right? And so, our 425 windows, our national windows, trying to make sure that we're putting the best possible products there where we think that our fans will have the most access to them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes sense. Again, we're speaking to Charlotte Carey here on the program, baby. This is phenomenal. NFL's director of broadcasting here on the show. And I saw this statistic. Shout out to Warren Sharp. He said, with this schedule, the Jets became the first team in NFL history to receive 6 primetime games in their first 11 weeks of the season. What went into that decision?
It's, getting back to that, everyone was excited about Aaron last year, biggest offseason story, 4 snaps, and then all of a sudden that offseason story went away. I think that everyone is, again, excited. What's really changed since last year, right? The team has maybe even gotten better, and it's exciting to see, Aaron coming back and hopefully doing what we were all hoping you would do last year, and the team make your run down the stretch. I think that what went into it for us is all of the networks obviously were hoping to see Aaron early on. But then beyond that, it just was a little bit of the way it shaked out. I would tell you that the games down the stretch, number one, there's always flex scheduling, but number two, we are using a lot of those games in our 1 o'clock windows. We can't really forget about CBS and Fox here in their 1 o'clock windows. We still need to make sure those windows have to go to 100% of the country and have to be relevant for that 100% of the country. There's competition and whatnot. The overall construct and structure is obviously very different than the other windows. So we are using the Jets a lot in those windows as kind of our widely distributed game and making sure that they still get a lot of exposure, even if it's not in prime time.
All right, Charlotte, let's be honest with me here. Just me and you. No one else is watching this right now. Just me and you here. Was packaging all of these Jet games within the first 11 some level of Aaron Rodgers injury insurance? Like, okay, like if we spread them all over the barn and say, oh, can't wait for this juicy week 16, whatever it is, and then, Tim Boyle's in this game. We're like, eh, boy. So by packaging it early, does that give you some level of a safety net? They're like, okay, like as long as he's healthy for these, all right, great. We're getting the maximum investment in what you guys are prognosticating here in May. And quite frankly, we're just getting the result in May. You guys have been working on this obviously since the end of last regular season, but is that a little bit of the thought process there?
Paul, if you have a crystal ball, we will definitely hire you on the NFL schedule team and bring you in. That would be awesome. We could really use it. As you can see, I mean, injuries happen, right? I think that it can happen to any quarterback, any team, anyone that goes down. It's really going to impact the rest of the season. So I wish I could tell you there was more of a story there, but there was no hedging. It was the way that this particular schedule shook out. And we really liked the way that we used all of those primetime games. Yes, they're a little earlier and all kind of in the first 11 weeks, but at the same time, you still have, as I was saying, a lot of those games that as we look through these schedules, we're really looking at that and pointing to that Jets game being our anchor in, call it week 16 or 17 for CBS or Fox.
I'm curious because I heard this from Mike North. Again, you guys got a wonderful team of people that are out there in the universe that are speaking on some of these subjects, which I find really interesting. It's something he said, and I don't know if he was representing it for the group, but like he felt really bad that like the Houston Texans ended up with 0 primetime games last year, and they're like, man, we missed it. And then they end up, being really good, or vice versa. Like if you put someone in a primetime slot a lot, and then they're not great, they're like, son of a geez. Again, going back to perhaps your crystal balling nature. So you answered it a little bit there. I'm kind of curious that thought process, and specifically, like when someone burns you, like in fantasy football, we take a guy and then they're terrible forever. I'm like, that bastard. I'm never drafting him again after what he did to me. How do you guys not allow that to affect you as you're making the next schedule? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a good point. I think that you have to look at all of the components, right? Like you look at the Jets this year, and to your point, like you could look at it last year, like, oh, you put them in a lot of primetime games, and then Aaron Rodgers was out in week 1. That's injuries. That's not the team burning us, or, the team's still good. The team's still really interesting. Again, I think that offseason story we were talking about from last year still resonates really going into this year. So from a Jets perspective, I don't think you look at it that way at all. But, I think that you've got to look at the whole, construct of the team and what they did in the offseason and what's changed. And if we think they're going to be good, Houston for sure was a miss last year. And, I think that we definitely put them in a lot of national windows this year and are using them widely. So, it's just you learn as you go. And that's also what flex scheduling is for, right? If we do miss, we have the ability to make those changes and pull those levers, which is really helpful. And now we have flex scheduling for Sunday night, Thursday night, and Monday night. So we can actually make a lot of changes if we have to later in the season.
Is that a hard process to do? Do you because you guys put this puppy together, you guys spent a lot of time and effort and energy putting this initial schedule together. Is it very difficult when you get to the points where, again, I think it's, better than me. What is it? Week 11 through 18?
Yeah, exactly. We have a couple levers we can pull early for Sunday night football starting around week 5, but then, there's just differences. It's kind of like 12 on and then 13 on. Okay. So differences for different packages, but the bottom line is like that crystal ball is the exact example of this, right? We are making this schedule in April and in May, and we know what we know at this point. But when the season starts, everything can change. It could be injuries, it could be records, whatever it may be. And down the stretch, you may be betting on these teams that you thought we're going to be in there and holding on that are no longer in that position. So you can make those changes, if needed, as we get down into, November and December there. But hopefully we don't need to, right? I mean, I think, just generally speaking, we don't have that many games that we flex out of, but at least we have the levers there if we need to.
And speaking of that lever, so I'm imagining it's just slightly off camera, but there's a big juicy red button in your room that you can smack for the flexing. Yeah, exactly. You put the Jets in a lot of prime time early, but with how the schedule kind of sets up on the back half, it seems like that button, I don't know, could be pressed in the second half of the season for some flexing. Is there any potential of that? Potentially,
it's definitely there's always potential for it, right? Like that's the entire reason we have it. And I think that's right now, as I said, we're really liking them in a lot of these 1 o'clock windows that we have them in later as our kind of lead game in some of those windows. But it all depends on who these teams are down the stretch, and if anything in prime time, like quote unquote falls apart and isn't as exciting as we hoped it would be, then we definitely push that red button and we go find whatever is interesting. So if there's a Jets game in that week that's the right game to put in prime time, we have the ability to do that.
Charlotte, the NFL schedule makers decided to, dip their toe back in the Black Friday waters for the Black Friday game waters, and you guys ended up on Chiefs Raiders. How'd you get there?
It's a good question. The Chiefs are interesting this year. Obviously they're interesting. They've been interesting the last few years.
Right.
But the Chiefs are interesting this year as they play actually every day of the week except for Tuesday. So I think that's the first time in modern history, at least, that's happened. But it's, they're playing in a lot of national windows, obviously. One of our biggest brands, Super Bowl champs again, Patrick Mahomes. But one of those pieces was, let's try the Chiefs on Black Friday. That would be really fun. And what's better than a good division opponent and an opponent that always plays them tough. And we liked the idea of Vegas Chiefs on Black Friday this year.
Who else was in the running? Can you spill those guts on the table?
It's a good question. I think that we saw a lot of different iterations, and we let it float for a while. And I think we got comfortable pretty quickly with Casey in that window. We really liked them there and thought it would be fun to actually, try something a little different this year. I think we'll continue to try things that are different on Black Friday. But that was where we decided we wanted to go this year.
Was there any thought, because Jet fans are kind of talking about this when we got the initial Black Friday game last year, which was Jets Dolphins, there was thought among, the social media, like, wow, maybe this can be our new tradition. Everyone talks about Cowboys on Thanksgiving, Lions on Thanksgiving. Maybe this could be the Jets thing. And it makes sense with all the shopping and the Black Friday thing, New York, New Jersey team hosting it every year. Was that ever a conversation?
I think that we kicked it around a little when we were talking about it, putting in a Black Friday game, but I think we really wanted to just try a few different things and see where Black Friday went. And it wasn't as much of there wasn't as much of a push to make it into a one team holiday, if that makes sense, like Thanksgiving, but we'll see where it goes in the future.
Okay. Something us fans talk about. I'm curious if this creeps into the rooms when you guys are talking about this. Rest differential. Fans bring that up a lot. They that it's something that is really a determiner when people are making fun of or going the other way on Jets schedule. All right, what's a rest differential here? Look, conspiracy theory. The Jets are getting gypped or whatever. Is that the rest differential argument? Is that a legitimate conversation as one of the factors in the room as you guys are making big time decisions?
We do definitely talk about it. We have a little tab in our analyzer that shows us exactly the rest differential and where it occurs in every team. We take it seriously, but a lot of the data has actually shown, particularly since not this last CBA, but even the CBA before, that it's really not as much of a competitive factor anymore. And there's not much of a win difference between coming off your bye or not. So we've worked really closely with our data and analytics team on this one. And they have compelling data that would suggest that rest differential may be a little bit more emotional at this point than it actually is from a competitive imbalance. So it is interesting. We still definitely do take it seriously, but it is not, it's not as much of a competitive factor. It doesn't seem based on the data as it used to be.
And an extra game here that we did not mention in the 11 weeks, which is not technically prime time, but it is standalone, is Jets Vikings. We get that week 5, the international schedule, as the Jets play the Minnesota Vikings in London. How do you guys choose the opponents for the international thing, which again is continuing to expand? We got Brazil, Friday Night Football for the first time in over 50 years. Munich, Germany, we're going to get that one as well on top of some of the London games. So there's a lot of expansion going on here.
A lot of expansion going on. I think you'll only see it continue. The opponents are interesting. So we have designated teams that the league decides every year that are going to go over and give up a home game to go play in London. But the opponents, it's actually an interesting process. The designated team can protect one opponent that they want to still play at home. And then we stay away from division games. We generally don't bring division opponents over. Everyone else is kind of in the mix for a trip overseas. So we let, again, this float. We used to lock these games in earlier, back 5 years ago. But I would say that within the last few years, we've let it float a lot more to see what different iterations of the schedule that we can find and what games really sound interesting internationally and kind of fit in the overall construct. And we liked the idea of Jets Vikings over there and thought it was a fun way to bring, that matchup internationally.
So let's talk about that. So like Vikings, they knew they were playing in London. We just didn't know who they were playing. So the Jets are the quote unquote opponent in this, and they're the one that gets selected. Is there any gauging, to use it as an example for the Jets, but there's other teams, obviously they're on the opposite end of that spectrum. Do you gauge the Jets, say, hey, would you want to? And if they're going to kick and scream about it, you're like, all right, well, I'll put that on the list. Or if they're really into it, like, oh, great. Okay, let me put them a little higher on the list. They want to do it, and it's also attractive for whatever reason you guys end up picking them. Are those parts of the conversation?
Yeah, I think that the teams who play the designated teams that year generally know that they're going to be potentially in the mix to go over. So we have those conversations, particularly around, travel around London and whatnot, and, bye weeks after. And you'll remember not too long ago, everyone that went over to London opted to have their bye week right after they came back from London and would go over really early. And that's changed a bit in recent years. Teams still do take their bye weeks after they have, the opportunity to do so. But you'll see a lot more, especially if you're playing it overseas early in the season, you'll see a lot more teams now opt to not take their bye week and come back to, maybe a home game or a close game afterwards, and try to push their bye week a little bit later. So it is interesting to see that, London in particular is definitely becoming more of a normalcy, if you will, within the league, and teams are getting used to it. So it is definitely interesting to see that it's seen as just something that happens every year and is not as much of a big trip, if you will, to go over.
You mentioned it in your answer, but I do want to clarify for the fans because I get this question like every day when we're doing the NFL schedule stuff. So teams that are ultimately selected for London, whether home or away, they have the option. So like once you call the Jets, say, hey, you're getting the London game. Do you want the bye week immediately after? Do they have the option to whether take it or not take it?
Yes.
Okay. And when that happens, another point of clarity, if they say, nah, we're good, we'd rather have it later, do they get to then pick when the later bye week is?
No, that's the only input you can have on a buy is if you go over to, London or Germany or Brazil, you have the option of Brazil, at least this year, week 1, we're not having buys in week 2. But generally speaking, if we have, if you go internationally over to Europe, we have those conversations. But otherwise, no, there is no conversation on when you're going to have your buy. Your buy falls where it falls after that.
And I'm curious. So, okay, Jets, obviously, they chose not to. They're going to week 5, and week 6, they're playing the Buffalo Bills on Monday Night Football. Their bye ends up being the Jets in week 12. Do you say, when they say, nah, we're good, we won't take the bye, when you go back into the war room and you're discussing this, do you say, okay, well, they're not taking the bye, but okay, we'll put them on Monday Night Football. We'll give them a little bit of an extra day here. We'll try to hook them up on the back end of the international to try to help them out a little bit. Is that at all part of the conversation as you're talking about, or that's just circumstance?
It fell where it fell this year. Lucky for them, I guess, to have an extra day coming back from London, but no, that wasn't part of the conversation. We definitely didn't push the Monday night game there. You'll see, other teams coming back from, international games, whether this year or other years, and coming back just to a home Sunday afternoon game. It just, that one happened to fall in that spot. And I think we were excited about that game back on Monday Night Football, but no, there was definitely no push to give them that extra day.
Okay. Again, Charlotte, a few more here, and then we'll get you out of here. Where are we going next? Let me grab the passport. Okay, we have Brazil, a little Brazil action from Germany. We got London, a couple of different stadiums, of course. What's next on the international schedule here over the next couple of years?
It's a good question. I think that you're only going to see it expand. I think there's going to be a little bit more Europe and otherwise, and we'll see where things fall over the next little while. But I do think that we will see more international games. I don't think we're going the other direction. I think that we'll keep pushing games internationally, and it's fun for the fans. It's I think it's fun for the teams, and it's great to at least have the international exposure and continue to push going that direction.
Hey, here's another random thing. I think in all of them that I saw that there are these 9:30 a.m. Eastern time kickoffs. But I remember semi-recent, may have been last year. I don't know. All the dates blur together. I'm sure they blur together for you, for someone who does it. But one of the times I saw that the London game was thrown in with the rest of the 1 o'clock windows. Was that like an experimental kind of thing?
No, actually, that used to happen more often back, 5-10 years ago. We used to have a lot more of these games at 1 o'clock, and we would have some at 9:30 a.m. and some in the 1 o'clock window. And those 1 o'clock games would just be played at night overseas. I think, it'll be interesting to see as we continue to expand how that model works. If we have all of them at 9:30 a.m. or if we go back into the 1 o'clock window, it's a question of windows at some point. When we, needed some windows for NFL Network, and everyone, I think, overseas likes the, afternoon game, and then also the teams get back earlier than they would, obviously, if they played in the 1 o'clock window Eastern time when they're in London. It's just a long travel back. So I think for all those reasons, I think we've seen a lot of 9:30 a.m. games recently, but not to say that we won't see 1 o'clock games in the future.
Speaking of the windows, going back to the Black Friday game for a second, you guys dip your toes in the water. You get the 3 o'clock kick, and I heard some of the analytics of the numbers of people watching, and apparently it was increasing as the game went on, despite the fact for Timbo. Sorry about that in advance, I guess, but or for previously, a belated apology for that for you guys. But is that dipping the toe in the water and liking the temperature? Is that what you like for the 3 o'clock, or is it a time that could get moved around a little bit for future Black Friday?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. 3 o'clock's definitely interesting. Rising hunt and putt levels, as you'd said, and also just being Black Friday being a bit of a holiday too. It's just trying that model and seeing how it works. I do think that it's as you said, with the rising hunt and putt levels, it's an interesting time to try. And you'll remember in the playoffs, we also kick around 3 o'clock, so it's not a window that's that abnormal for us. But it's not generally one we see in the regular season as often. But Black Friday is an interesting and unusual day.
That's for sure. And for people watching the visual version of this interview, there's a beautiful picture of you behind here holding the schedule with all these beep, boop, bops and different colors and things. How has I don't know the proper way to ask this, but with the computer advancements and that becoming a bigger part of the NFL schedule making process, where you have computers that are spitting out stuff as you guys are putting different kinds of limits and calculations on things, and things are coming out. How has that changed the script for when they used to do it basically by hand?
Our whole software structure has changed drastically with, even honestly in the last few years. We are so lucky to have great partners, and especially what we're talking just even about the hardware. A company like AWS has provided us with just so much hardware that we can run on, thousands of computers a night and see so many more schedules than we've ever seen before. So we do, we've worked with a lot of different partners who have different expertise. Our Optimal Planning Solutions is our partner that kind of houses our actual solving software, and where we input all of our rules and whatnot, and the schedules are returned to. And then it's handed off to a company called Garobi that's a commercially available optimizer, then to AWS to actually go solve, and then back into optimal planning. So it's a whole iterative process. And so that's just what we do overnight. We come in the morning, we look at all the schedules that came in overnight, analyze them, look at the good, the bad, the ugly, what we want to change, fix, throw out, write new rules, and start again. So it's a little bit like Groundhog Day. We do it over and over and over and over and over again. And finally we get towards the end, start honing in on things we really like, and, just try to have a few different spins. If we're trying to maybe fix 1 o'clock window or 1 3-game road trip or things along those lines. And then it's finally time to go up to the commissioner's office and say, here, boss, here's our best one. And the schedule that we're actually playing is the last schedule that we looked at this year. So that was pretty fun. We had a leader in the clubhouse for a few days that lasted through a lot of contenders. And this was the last actual schedule we looked at. So that was a kind of fun story for this year.
Wow. So was there, to what people were saying on social media, was the schedule supposed to come out a week before? And then you guys went, okay, we got to go back to the lab. There's something else here. And that's why we ended up getting on the May 15th. Are those rumors true?
The schedule was, came out, I think, around the 11th last year. It comes out generally sometime in mid-May. And, for us, we'll take as much time as we're given, and when it's time for the schedule to come out, we'll give them our best possible schedule. So that's generally the way we work from the schedule team perspective. But no, it was we at least got to, after the draft this year was really nice. We had time, and as I said before, it wasn't too long ago where we used to put the schedule out before the draft. So we couldn't even react to the things that happened in the draft. So now that the schedule comes out around mid-May, it's really nice to be able to actually have that time to react to everything that's happening in the draft and then come up with, whether it's a team like Chicago, for instance, who's pretty interesting after what they did this year, whether it's the primetime games or honestly, like we were talking about with the Jets, even those 1:00 windows, we're using them in lead 1:00 window, as we call anchor games. There, which is you'll see them scattered over the course of the season too. So having that time to react and be able to actually, make the best possible decisions, as I said, we'll take all the time we can get.
And so it's good for you and probably good for us, to be honest with you, because when it was shoved in the middle of April, it kind of got lost in the draft pro day cycle and everything that was going on. So it didn't get the proper love. May 15th, we're starving for content, baby. Yeah. So in this, I'd be excited about it in July. It doesn't matter the month for me, but in particular, it seems like it finally gets its own spotlight. And you guys, by virtue, also getting the proper flowers thrown at your feet for this massive project you guys have been working on for a long time. So it seems like from a marketing perspective, you guys having the most amount of time, it's all kind of the stars and moons aligned here with this kind of May release.
Yeah, agree. It's been great. And it's been really nice to have, to have the ability to react to free agency also, but then also getting to the draft point and being able to actually react to anything that happens, whether it's trades or just draft picks. I mean, it's great to be able to actually make those moves and have the extra time to really make sure we're doing it right.
How much of an impact does that have? So, okay, I get Aaron Rodgers. Okay, that one probably had a pretty big impact. But, like, in general, there's Stephon Diggs getting traded from the Bills to the Texans. They play each other. Ooh, okay. Does that change the landscape? Or other moves of that nature where you could get revenge factors and other interesting angles. How much does that flip where you guys may already be settled on what you believe the game is and where it stands in your kind of hierarchy to something like that adding to the mix? Well, okay, we got to reevaluate this. Maybe this goes from a C+ to a B+. Or what have you.
Yeah, the story around it matters, right? And we definitely have kind of revenge games, if you will, this year. Russell Wilson returns. There's Pittsburgh going back to Denver. You've got Sean Payton, Denver, going back to New Orleans this year. You've got the Harbaugh Bowl. Like there are definitely some really fun games. Even Kirk Cousins returns back to Minnesota. Kirk Cousins returns version 2 back to Washington. I mean, you can definitely point to a lot of these games this year that are fun, quote unquote, revenge or return games that have more of a story around them and make them definitely more interesting.
When do you know when you have the one? Because let me ask you this before we get to that. How many schedules go through the simulator? I mean, how many do we have? Like an infinite amount?
It's honestly an infinite amount. I can't even tell you. I don't know how many we looked at this year, but my eyes are really tired. I'll tell you that. No, we looked through thousands of schedules this year, and we start really honing in on the pieces that we like towards the end down the stretch here, and have an overall structure that's really good, and have, as I kept saying, leaders in the clubhouse and trying to beat the leader and beat the leader and beat the leader. And this was one that beat a leader that was a leader for a little while, and we didn't think we were going to do better then. And that's a high bar. And once this one won, we said, okay, we're done. This is it. This is the one. So it's definitely a process every year to get to the end and figure out what that perfect, mythical, magical, perfect schedule is, but this one kind of set that bar, and you're looking for making sure that you have the best possible television while also making sure that the teams are not unduly, I guess harmed isn't the right word, but just, making sure that there's nothing unfair in their schedule. And we have a senior football person in the room with us who takes a look and helps us from a football perspective and make sure that everything looks okay to her before we, go to the next step. And so we definitely work closely with a lot of different people who have different expertise to make sure that we're, in the right spot here. But this schedule overall, I would say we all saw it, went through it, and we knew right then and there that this was the one.
What's the number one complaint you normally get from NFL teams?
It's a good question. I think my favorite line here is if you ask 32 coaches what their least favorite thing is about their schedule, they'll come up with 32 different answers. So I'm not sure that there's one complaint across the board that we see. And, also I was talking to a coach yesterday who said, you could hand me any schedule and I will find something to hate. And so, it's an interesting question. And, but I do think the answer is there's going to be no perfect schedule. You can give them perfect home away spacing or whatever over the course of it. And every team will find something that is not going to be perfect for them. But again, I think it's all individual. It depends on your team, what you're hoping for. And I think that it's from where we sit, it's just trying to make sure that from a competitive perspective that we are making sure that we are giving everybody a fair schedule.
Charlotte, does that give you validation? I can just speak from the Jets' perspective. The Jets schedule came out. I had people going, wow, what a great schedule. Schedule makers really did them a solid. And then someone else goes, oh, this is the worst schedule I've ever seen. They always gyp the Jets. When you get those, it's almost like on a broadcast, like, I got to hate this guy, such a homer. And then the other guy goes, oh, well, very on the opposite side.
We'll take that as a 50%, right? Then we're right in the middle. It's just fine. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Is that kind of the perspective when you guys are getting that from either coaches or others, or just normal, the fans, who I'm sure is a big point of someone you're listening to try to get the pulse of everybody? Is that the comforting feeling like, okay, I guess we did get it right when we're getting people on both sides complaining or either praising?
Yeah, I would say that also we do listen to the complaints, and we will look back and, work with our analytics team to try to see if there's any validity to any of the complaints. And if there is a competitive advantage that we ever find, we definitely work to make sure that we don't, do that again. So or make sure that it's not something that is too onerous on a team. So we definitely take it seriously. So we're joking around a little bit here, but it is definitely something that we take seriously and go back and do a lot of work on to make sure that we're giving the teams the best possible schedules while also making the best TV schedule.
Charlotte, just two more here before we get you out of here. One, how many people are in the room with you that are a part of this NFL schedule making process? Like I said, we're giving love to you here. Mike North, I see, does a lot of media opportunities, so we only sometimes see a few faces, but there's a lot of people behind the scenes that make things happen. How many people are in that room along with the computers trying to crank out and make all these possibilities?
I think we have 7 or 8 of us now. Some kind of go in and out of the room a little bit more than others. But I think it's 7 or 8 of us now. And it wasn't too long ago that it was really 4 of us. It was a very small team. And I remember, I think maybe one of my first years doing it was Mike, Howard Katz, Blake Jones, and me. And that was the entire schedule team. So the team has definitely evolved over the years. We've tried to add different people with different expertise in and who can help us just make better schedules and push the envelope and do better every year. So I think that's the goal for everyone, right? And everything you do. So that's we've hopefully been successful in doing that and make sure that we are doing the right things by all the clubs. And then also making sure that we're doing the right things by the fans and putting the right games in the right windows. And hopefully our crystal ball is working pretty well. And, we have the right time of year for those games.
Charlotte, is it better or worse having more people in the room? Sometimes you get more mouths in the room. That can be, good or bad, I suppose.
Yeah. You know what? Honestly, I personally like it because I think that they're, if they, it's just everyone has their own kind of area and expertise. And again, I think that I really like to be challenged sometimes on, traditional thought processes and ways that we've always done things and push the envelope and try to make sure that we are thinking outside the box a little bit. So I do think that it is helpful to have the extra people in the room, as long as they're the right people, right? As long as you're the right people in the room, then I think it only makes us better.
Okay, Charlotte. So now that the schedule making process is over, what does your summer look like? A book trip to Costa Rica? Where are we going?
Yes, turning everything off. You will not be able to find me. No, honestly, we start gearing up for next year. This is a very short reprieve here, and we will look back at this whole process, do some simulations, and try to fix some things or change some things, not on this schedule, but just over the course of the process, and what we could look at tweaking in the future. And so we dive right in there and try to figure out what we're going to do for next year.
Wow. Well, you're a monster, Charlotte. I guess that's why you're in the position you're in. I need a pay raise probably if I could pound the table for you to get one of those doing God's work here.
Paul said it's time. There we go.
Hey, there we go. We got to do more of these interviews. Well, Charlotte, thank you so much for taking the time. And, the fans are very curious about this process. It's very interesting. It seems very complicated. And, but it's awesome because, this is a celebration. This is a national holiday is basically what it's turned into for scheduled release day, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me, Paul. This was a lot of fun.
All right. We'll do this again. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. And we'll see you next time here on the channel. Take care.